It's amazing how people can act as though they know what's best for you, especially when it comes to choices that don't fit neatly into their own worldview. I've always been close with my brother, Joey. He's my go-to person, the one I turn to when I need advice, comfort, or just someone to listen. But there's a problem: his wife, Emma. It's not that I've never tried to get along with her. Believe me, I've put in the effort. But it's been a struggle from the start. She's pretentious. The kind of person who looks down on others just because they don't think like her. It drives me insane. Why can't we just respect and embrace the differences that make us who we are? Despite all of that, I still love Joey. I still do. He's family, after all. But Emma, I just couldn't find it in me to like her. She and Joey were perfectly matched, though. Both came from business school, both had similar views on life. They dated for 5 years before getting married at the age of 24. By then, I already knew I didn't like Emma. We'd met countless times by then, at birthdays, family gatherings, holidays, and every time, she found a way to say something that got under my skin. But it wasn't just me. Most of the time, I was the one on the receiving end of her snide remarks. It's like she had this need to make comments on the way I live, as if she had a right to judge. For the record, I live a very unconventional life, and I'm fine with that. I don't need anyone's approval to do what I do. I'm a voiceover artist, and while it may not be the most traditional job, it's a well-paying one. I've had gigs doing everything from audiobooks to commercials, and I'm thriving. But Emma doesn't see it that way. She's convinced that I'm living in some kind of unstable career, just waiting for my voice to fail me. She somehow believes that if I lose my voice, it's over. It's absurd. I take excellent care of my voice. It's my livelihood. I can't understand why she feels the need to publicly belittle my career choices. And the worst part? She thinks she's the expert on my life, simply because she went to a prestigious business school. I didn't take the traditional academic route. I went to community college, sure, but I didn't really care about school. I was more interested in sports, theater, and other things. It wasn't that I couldn't have been a good student, but it just wasn't for me. After high school, I started working. I was an intern at a company, but then I started auditioning for commercials. It was a person on set who noticed my voice and encouraged me to pursue it. That's how I landed my first gig, and I've never looked back since. Emma doesn't understand my industry at all. She thinks I should go back to college, get a degree from a real school, and then I'll have something to fall back on if my voice ever fails. I might have considered her advice if she didn't always speak to me like she knew better, as if her business degree somehow gave her authority over my career. But it's not just about work. My life choices don't fit into the mold she expects. I've made it clear to my family that marriage isn't something I'm interested in. They've tried to convince me, but I'm firm in my decision. I don't have a problem with marriage, I just don't think it's for me. That said, I do have a daughter. She's 5 years old, and I adopted her when she was just a baby. Her biological mother couldn't care for her, and I knew I could give her the love and support she needed. Some might say that a husband would make things easier for me, but I don't want one. I'm perfectly happy with the life I've built. I've had relationships, sure, but none that were serious enough to change my stance on marriage. It's not about having a husband, it's about being a mom, which is what I wanted, and I felt ready to be one. It took a while for my family to understand, but eventually, they accepted it. They had no choice but to respect my choices, even if they didn't fully understand them. And honestly, that's all I need. I'm happy with the life I've created for myself and my daughter, and I wouldn't change a thing. I lived my life the way I wanted, without listening to anyone else's opinions. I wasn't going to change just because people thought I should. Everyone had to accept that. Well, everyone except Emma. She still felt like she could comment on my life, as if her thoughts had any weight in my decisions. It didn't matter that I had just adopted a daughter. For months, she kept pushing me to find a husband, warning me that my life would get tough if I didn't. I found it incredibly annoying. Honestly, I was about to snap and say something, but there was one reason I held back: my brother. I loved him too much to say anything that might upset him. He was the only reason I stayed quiet, even when Emma pushed all my buttons. I had tried talking to him about her behavior before, even when they were dating. He told me she didn't mean to be hurtful. She genuinely believed she was helping, giving advice as if she were some sort of good Samaritan. He saw her actions as good intentions, even if they were overbearing. Every time I told him I couldn't take it anymore, he begged me to keep quiet. And when I say begged, I mean begged. He'd tear up, and it was impossible for me to ignore that. I couldn't stand the sight of him crying, and I certainly didn't want to be the one to make him cry. So, I kept quiet. I let Emma get away with everything she said, no matter how condescending or ridiculous. This went on for years until, out of nowhere, they stopped speaking to me entirely. No warning, no explanation. They just vanished. Of course, I eventually found out why, but before I get into that, let me give you some background. 2 years ago, when their business went under, I had let them move in with me. They had both quit their jobs to start their own business, a decision I didn't think was smart. They were young, with very little savings, and I tried to warn Joey. But he brushed me off, telling me they were business majors and knew exactly what they were doing. He was convinced they could make it big, despite the risks. I knew better. They were overconfident and underprepared. They started an event management business with no connections and barely any capital. Anyone with half a brain knows that in an industry like that, without connections, you're doomed. But they didn't listen to me. They pushed ahead, and as I predicted, their business tanked. When things went south, they showed up at my door, desperate. They couldn't pay rent and realized they had made a huge mistake. They had borrowed money from friends to fund the business, and now, with no income and no way of paying it back, they were drowning. It was a heartbreaking time. They had to shut everything down, let go of their dreams, and face the consequences. Of course, I let them stay with me. I couldn't just turn my back on my brother. He was family, and I wanted to help him out. They were both incredibly grateful at first, especially Emma. She knew I was doing them a huge favor, so for 6 months, she kept her behavior in check. No snide comments, no backhanded remarks. She was on her best behavior because she knew the reality of the situation. But, after about 4 months, Joey asked me to help him out again. He wanted me to use my connections to get him a new job. He hated his old one and had to take it back when the business failed. Emma was fine working again, but Joey didn't like where he was. So, he asked me to reach out to a friend of mine who owned a fashion label. I made a few calls, and thanks to my connections, my friend agreed to hire him, despite his lack of experience. The job was great, decent pay, solid prospects. Within 2 months, they were back on their feet. They moved out of my house and started their new chapter. Joey promised me he wouldn't forget what I did for him. It was a big deal, and I thought it meant something. But it turns out that promise didn't last. It didn't take long for him to forget the favor I had done for him. At least it took a year for him to forget, but Emma? She was quick to move on. The second she had her own space, she reverted to her old ways, making rude comments, being condescending. Why? Because now, her husband was working in a great position with a good salary. They didn't need me anymore. She no longer had to suck up to me. And so, she stopped pretending. She stopped acting gracious. I should have seen it coming. I should have known who she really was. But I couldn't do that to my brother. I could have shattered her illusion of being a big shot by telling her that I was the one who got Joey that job, but I didn't. I chose not to hurt him because at the end of the day, I'm too old for petty drama. And so, she went back to making strange, rude comments as if nothing had ever happened. I had reached a point where I could no longer bite my tongue. It was getting harder and harder to keep my frustration at bay. She was so ungrateful, and every time I tried to stay calm, a surge of anger bubbled up inside me. I honestly wanted to slap her across the face, or at the very least, tell her exactly what I thought. But before I could even act on that impulse, Joey, ever the peacemaker, would rush to my side, trying to calm me down. It wasn't easy, being in that position, but somehow, I kept my cool. For so long, I held it together, but there was a breaking point, and I felt like I was finally at it. Then, nearly a year ago, it happened. We were celebrating my mom's birthday at her house. As usual, I brought my daughter along. She was just walking around, playing, minding her own business. Everything seemed fine until Emma decided to interact with her. At first, I was okay with it, but then Emma said something that made my blood boil. Out of nowhere, she asked my daughter to tell me to find a dad for her because she would need one as she got older. My daughter, confused and unsure, didn't know how to respond. And that's when it hit me. I was furious. I could let her say weird stuff to me because I'm an adult, and honestly, I avoid confronting her because it's just not worth it. But she couldn't drag my daughter into this nonsense. That was crossing a line. Before Joey could even step in, I snapped. I stormed up to Emma and told her, in no uncertain terms, to keep her mouth shut and not speak to my daughter that way. I didn't care about my tone. She deserved it. I had been putting up with her nonsense for far too long. She had no right to involve my child in her petty remarks. I knew she wouldn't take it well, but I didn't care. That was the final straw. After that, she completely cut me off. She stopped greeting me, stopped speaking to me altogether unless it was absolutely necessary. And honestly, I was relieved. If that was the way she wanted it, then fine. Joey, of course, was upset. He kept urging me to reconcile, but I refused. I'd had enough. She had disrespected me too many times for me to even consider mending things. I made it clear to him I wasn't going to apologize, not after everything she had put me through. Sure, he was upset that we weren't speaking, but honestly, I couldn't care less. I had let so many things slide for his sake, but this was different. I had been more than generous, letting them live under my roof for 6 months when they were struggling. And yet, she couldn't even show me basic respect. If she wanted to avoid me, so be it. It only showed me the kind of person she really was. The only one who still seemed to care about our relationship was Joey. I told him that I had done enough for him, but there was no way I was backing down. He may not have understood, but I had my reasons. The situation with Emma was just too much. A few days later, my mom called me, asking what I was wearing to my brother's housewarming party. I was completely thrown off. I had no idea about any housewarming party. Turns out, Joey and Emma had bought a new house just a week ago, and the invitations had gone out the same day. My mom, who didn't get the memo about keeping it a secret from me, ended up mentioning it. I was blindsided and offended. I had helped them, and yet I wasn't even invited. It was beyond disrespectful. I had helped Joey get his current job, which enabled him to afford this house. It felt like a slap in the face. I immediately called my brother to confront him. When I asked him about the party, he didn't even hesitate to tell me that I wasn't invited on purpose. Emma had banned me from their new house. She didn't want me at any of their events, housewarming, anniversaries, birthdays, anything. Not unless I apologized. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He said it so casually, as if it was just another normal conversation. No remorse, no guilt, just a statement of fact. I didn't waste my breath arguing with him. I made it clear I wasn't going to apologize to Emma. She was the one who had disrespected me every chance she got. I had been letting it slide for his sake, but now? No more. I was deeply hurt and offended. After thinking about it for a week, I decided I was going to do something about it. It was petty, yes, but it felt like the right time for a little revenge. They had been turning people against me, painting me as the villain to the rest of the family. They had manipulated the situation so much that people were keeping secrets from me. I got the address from my mom and showed up at their housewarming party uninvited, making sure to arrive when all the guests were there. The look on their faces when they saw me? Priceless. It confirmed my suspicions. Everyone there had been led to believe that I was the bad guy. But I had come prepared, armed with the proof of their ingratitude. I had printed out the emails. For 6 months, my brother and his wife lived with me after their business collapsed. I helped them get back on their feet, even securing my brother a much better job with better pay and hours. But despite all that, his wife, Emma, never stopped disrespecting me. I kept my silence, not wanting to create tension, thinking I was just as important to him as he was to me. But it turns out, I was wrong. That day, I had had enough. The resentment that had been building for months finally bubbled over. I walked into their housewarming party, all eyes on me, and I didn't hold back. I told everyone exactly how they'd lived off me when things got tough, how I had helped my brother, all while Emma continuously treated me with contempt. I felt the room shift. Emma's face fell, her eyes wide with shock. But the worst part was yet to come. As I revealed everything, she looked at Joey, almost pleading with him to deny it, even though I had printouts of the emails to prove everything. When Joey finally confirmed the truth, Emma broke down. She couldn't hold it in anymore. "The party's over," she said, tears streaming down her face, and she stormed upstairs with Joey hot on her heels. I had nothing left to say, so I left without another word. The next morning, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was sharp, disappointed. What I had done at the party was unacceptable. My actions were cruel, she said. Even Joey texted me, telling me he never wanted to speak to me again. Emma was devastated, and I had ruined the first day of their new life. It felt like I was being vilified just for standing up for myself. But now, I wasn't sure if crashing their party had been the right thing to do. The hate was pouring in. So, I turned to Reddit, asking if I was in the wrong for what I did. 2 weeks passed, and still no one from my family reached out. My parents didn't speak to me, and neither did my brother. It was as though I had been erased from their lives. But the strangers on Reddit? They didn't think I was wrong, and that meant a lot. At least someone out there understood. I had always gone out of my way for my family. I had sacrificed so much, and yet, now I was the one being made out to be the villain. Emma had turned the whole story into something that painted me as the bad guy, even labeling me a sociopath. It was infuriating. She was getting all the sympathy, playing the victim, and I was just supposed to take the blame. But there were a few people on my side, thankfully. They told me Emma was exaggerating, twisting the truth to make me seem worse. But even with that, the situation was still vile. It made me realize I was better off without them. A month went by, and still, no contact from my family. It had become unbearable. My daughter would ask about her uncle and her grandparents, and I had no answers for her. It broke my heart. I had grown so used to the weekly calls with Joey and the constant interactions with my parents. But now? Silence. Then came my daughter's birthday. It was a lonely day. My family didn't even bother to wish her a happy birthday. The only people at the party were a few friends and some work associates. Not a single relative showed up. My daughter was confused, asking why her uncle, the one who was always there for her birthdays, wasn't there. That hit me hard. I probably shouldn't let it bother me, but it did. I felt hurt, disappointed. It was a reminder of what I had lost, and how little they seemed to care. Time passed, and I eventually began to come to terms with it. At least the situation revealed the true colors of my family. I knew where I stood now. And with that clarity, I began to heal. Fast forward almost 2 years. Out of nowhere, Joey reached out. Emma's pregnant. And they want me to attend their pregnancy announcement party. I couldn't believe it. After all this time, after everything that happened, they were reaching out. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to forgive, to try and move forward, but another part of me feared the same old patterns would emerge. I hadn't spoken to my family in so long, and I had almost given up on the idea of reconciliation. But maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something different. Joey told me that Emma was the one who suggested inviting me, so I guess they're trying to make things right. But I'm not sure if anything will ever truly be the same. Only time will tell.